Hello, boys and girls. It's time to hear another part of our story. And we are learning about Hudson Taylor. He is on his way to China. Now, remember, he's from England. And so he is on his way to China. And back then, they had to take a boat. There was no airplanes yet. They had to take a boat. And so he was sailing to China. And guess how long it would take to get to China from England back then on a boat? It would take 5 months. That's almost half a year. It would take them to sail a boat all the way to China. So Hudson is on this boat, and as soon as they start, they hit stormy weather. And thankfully, the sailors are able to get the boat back under control, and they're able to take it. And then, a little bit more into their journey, the wind stops blowing. It just stops blowing. And if you don't have wind, your sails are not going to move, which is not going to help push the boat the right way, because you can turn the sails to get the wind into the sails to turn your boat. So they're just drifting. They're drifting so the water can carry them basically wherever it wants. And this strong current came. A current is the movement in the water, and it's making the water move the boat. And they're headed straight for rocks. Okay? We all know what's going to happen to a boat if it hits the rocks. It's going to crash, it's going to get a hole in it, and it's going to sink. And so they are heading towards these rocks. And the sailors are terrified. They're so scared. No wind's coming. They're trying to get the wind. And the captain basically, he's talking to Hudson Taylor, and the captain says, there is nothing more we can do. There is nothing more we can do. And Hudson says, actually, Captain, there is. There's one more thing we've forgotten to do. We've forgotten to pray to God. He said, there's 4 of us on this boat that are Christians, and none of us have prayed to God yet. Let's go right now and pray that God will send us a wind. And so sure enough, they all went into their rooms where they were sleeping down below in the boat, and they went in there and they all prayed to God. And Hudson knew that God was going to answer his prayer. Hudson Taylor had great trust in God, and he knew God is going to answer this. God's going to take care of me. I'm going to China. God, that's where God wants me. And so Hudson Taylor came up and he said, hey, sailor, put down that sail. And the sailor just laughed at him. He said, there's no wind. I'm not putting down this sail. There's no point. And Hudson said, God is going to send a wind. Put down the sail. And the sailor again said, I'm not going to just believe that God is going to send a wind. I want to see it with my own eyes. I want to see this gust of wind. And after this man said that, the sail started to move a little bit. Just a little bit of it's hanging down. It starts to move a little bit. Hudson's like, see, do you see? God is going to send a wind. Put the sail down. And the sailor puts the sail down. A gust of wind comes, and they are able to quickly save their boat from smashing into the rocks. And I forgot to show you this picture. There's Hudson Taylor telling that sailor, put down that mast, put it down. And so sure enough, God saves him. And they all gave thanks to God that day. They were so thankful that God saved their lives because they were going to smash into those rocks. Well, finally, after 5 months on this ship called the Dumfries, Hudson Taylor finally lands in China. And he is so excited. But the first thing he needs to do is find somewhere to live. So he finds a missionary woman who will take him in, and he's going to take him in. And so he goes to stay with her and to live in her house. And she was an older woman. And he right away, because he had learned a little Chinese when he was in England, but they didn't know enough Chinese to teach him. So he really needed to know more Chinese. So right away he starts to study Chinese. And he'd be getting up every morning, and all day long he had a Chinese instructor who was teaching him Chinese. And Hudson Taylor, Chinese is a hard language. It is a very hard language. Even now, Chinese is one of the hardest languages to learn. And they speak very differently. Look at these are words. Their words are like pictures. And their pictures are just like one stroke's different between the one picture. And it's hard. It's hard to figure out. So Hudson, he would get headaches and he would get a little sick because he was just trying so hard to understand this Chinese language, which was so difficult. It was so hard. But finally, he knows enough to tell people about Jesus, to tell the story of Jesus. And so he's so excited to get started. Now, the way he started was he would have either a missionary friend come with him or one of his Chinese instructors would actually come with him, and they would go out into the cities, the Chinese cities, and they would tell these Chinese people about Jesus. Well, Hudson Taylor, he wanted to get to more cities, and there was a lot of rivers. So he got a boat and he started to travel up and down the rivers to go to different towns so that he could tell lots of Chinese people about Jesus, people that have never even heard of Jesus. They are worshiping statues. Chinese people had a lot of different weird statues that they would worship. And so some of these Chinese people had never even heard the word Jesus. And so Hudson Taylor, he gets a boat, he puts on a stove so that he can cook meals on his boat, and he takes as much medication as he can in his doctor kit, and he takes all of that on his boat. And he also took some blankets because it is colder in China. When you get a little further into China, it's a little colder. And so he was all prepared. He's going to just live on this boat, and he's going to go up and down and visit all the different towns. And so that's what he starts doing. And he takes pamphlets with him that are written in Chinese that teach the gospel so that he can hand them out. And he even had a couple of Bibles, the New Testament, only the New Testament. He didn't have the Old Testament, but he had the New Testament in the Chinese language that he could give out after people got saved so that they would have a Bible. And so Hudson Taylor was traveling up and down and telling many, many Christians and helping the sick people and just constantly traveling. And he loved it. He loved being able to tell the Chinese people. Now, some of the cities, when he would get off the boat, they were even further out. And so he had to take like a taxi. This is their taxi back then. As you can see, it's a man who would hold a cart, and Hudson would sit here with all his supplies here. His bags probably tied in by rope. And this man would push Hudson Taylor so that Hudson Taylor could get to the towns faster and also not be exhausted by the time he gets there. Remember, Hudson was a sickly boy, and so he still struggled sometimes. He couldn't walk long distances still. And so he would sometimes take these taxis and go even further into cities. Well, finally, Hudson decides he wants to go to this city called Tung Chau. Okay, so he wants to go to Tung Chau. Well, he's starting to head to Tung Chau, and this time he has a missionary friend with him who was traveling with Hudson at this point. And they're starting to go to Tung Chau. They're heading on the road, and they meet a Chinese man on his way out of Tung Chau. And he sees Hudson Taylor and his friend, and he said, do not go into Tung Chau. If you go into Tung Chau, you will be beaten and you will be thrown into prison and they will torture you. Do not go into that city. You need to turn around and you need to go back to your boat and you need to go to a different city. Don't go to Tung Chau. Do you think that stopped Hudson Taylor? No. Hudson Taylor said, well, if I die, I die. But I am telling these Chinese people about Jesus. And so they go to the city, and as soon as they enter the city, the soldiers grab them. They start hitting them. They start kicking them. And one of them grabs Hudson Taylor. You can see, grabs him around the neck and is choking Hudson Taylor. He can barely breathe. This whole entire time, these Chinese people are beating Hudson and choking Hudson and kicking him. Do you know what Hudson and his missionary friend were doing? They were just calling out about Jesus. As soon as Hudson could breathe again, he would tell a little more about Jesus. And then another Chinese man would grab his hair and pull him and grab him. And Hudson's telling a little more about Jesus. He didn't stop telling about Jesus, even though he was getting beaten and kicked and hit and even choked. And that didn't stop Hudson. He knew these people desperately needed Jesus. They desperately needed Jesus. They were miserable. Well, these soldiers, after they stopped beating them, they said, let's kill these guys. Let's kill these foreigners. We don't want them. They're foreigners. Let's kill them. Thankfully, God made one of the Chinese men say, no, we have to show him to the Mandarin. Now, the Mandarin would have been the leader of the city. And so sure enough, they drag Hudson Taylor and this missionary through the streets, still beating them, drag them through the streets to the Mandarin. And then they push them down in front of the Mandarin. And the Mandarin asked them, well, what are you doing here? What are you doing in my city? What are you here for? And so, of course, Hudson Taylor tells this Mandarin all about Jesus. And this Mandarin even takes a New Testament in his Chinese language and reads the Bible. And he tells Hudson Taylor and his missionary friend, I'm not going to send you to jail. I want you to go and tell all my people about Jesus. And so Hudson and his missionary friend go through Tung Chau telling everyone about Jesus. Well, while they are doing that, the Mandarin, he even sends soldiers to protect them and tells these soldiers that they are their protection and they are not there to make sure that nothing happens to Hudson and his friend. And that day, Hudson and his friend told many, many people in Tung Chau about Jesus, and many people got saved. Well, Hudson Taylor, he was still traveling and going from town to town. But you know, some of these Chinese people had never seen a foreigner. They had never seen a man that had white skin and brown hair. They always had black hair, and the men grew their black hair really, really long and would braid it, and it was called a queue. And these men would wear their long hair, and every Chinese person had black hair. So sometimes when Hudson would go into a village, they would run. They would run and close all the doors and all the windows. They'd be terrified of Hudson Taylor because they've never seen anybody look different than them. And so they would be terrified. Now, sometimes the villagers would run out and they'd be pushing on him and touching him, and they'd rub his skin like, does that come off? Like, what is that? You know, and they'd touch his hair and they'd be, oh, look, this person's hair is different. And so Hudson Taylor had different reactions in every place he went, but he tried so hard to be Chinese. He ate Chinese food. He would speak Chinese. He would read Chinese. He was trying so hard to blend in with them so that they wouldn't be scared of him. Well, one day when he went back to his boat after he'd been through the city trying to tell others about Jesus, and he'd kind of run into a whole bunch of people scared of him. One of his Chinese tutors that had taught him Chinese, when he came back to his boat, he was eating rice and duck eggs. That's a Chinese food that they love to eat, was duck eggs and rice. And so he's eating that. And the Chinese tutor looked at him and said, Hudson, you eat like us, you speak like us, you read like us. Why don't you look like us? And so Hudson thought, well, why don't I? If I look like them, I can go out and tell more people about Jesus. And so sure enough, he shaves his head just like the Chinese people. They have their heads shaved, and he gets almost like a wig. He gets fake hair that's in a braid, and he clips it to his hair, and he dyes the rest of his hair black so that he looks just like a Chinese man. And he puts on the Chinese clothes, and he takes off his, in England, they always wore little top hats. He takes off his top hat, he takes off his suit. He now looks like a Chinese man. And this opened up so many doors because now he would walk into a city and they wouldn't see him as different at all. They would look at him and they would think he was a Chinese man just like them. He's talking Chinese, he's reading Chinese, he looks Chinese, he's eating Chinese food. He's just another Chinese man. And so now people were not scared. He was able to go into cities and people were inviting him into their house. They were saying, come into our house. Tell us more about this Jesus. And so this made Hudson so excited. Well, eventually he got to a city on the river and they wanted him to stay. Oh, they said, Hudson, please stay. Please tell us more and more about Jesus. Stay with us and we'll give you a house. And so they gave Hudson a house on the street. And so Hudson during the day would be a doctor. Here's Hudson right here in his long queue, just like the Chinese. He would be a doctor during the day, and he would bandage anybody or give medicine to anybody who needed it. And of course, the whole entire day, he would tell them about Jesus. Then at night, he had all of his neighbors come over, and he would have Bible studies with them, and he would go over the Bible with them and teach them, well, what does this mean? Let me tell you the story of David and Goliath. They had never heard of David and Goliath. Let me tell you the story of Jonah. They had never heard the story of Jonah. And so Hudson was teaching these people in this village all about Jesus. He was here for 5 weeks. Now, unfortunately, at the end of the time, that's like a month and a week. At the end of his time, he received a notice that said he had to leave. All foreigners had to leave the city. And so Hudson, sadly, he had to lock up this house that they had given him. He had to get on his boat. He had to say goodbye to all of his friends in this Chinese city, and he had to leave them. And Hudson didn't understand. Why was God making him leave? These people were learning about Jesus. They were learning about God. And now he had to leave? And where would he go? Hudson didn't know it, but God had a super duper surprise for him. Hudson had no clue at this point. He had no clue. He just knew he was leaving the people that were learning about God, and he didn't understand. But God has a great plan for him. And so Hudson said, okay, God, you want me to leave here? I'm going to leave. You must have something better planned. And God does. And we'll find out next week what God has planned for Hudson. Well, I hope you all have a great rest of the week. And I hope you're enjoying learning about Hudson Taylor and the amazing things that God did to protect him, but also the amazing things that God does to just bring others to him. These people had never heard the word of God, and God sent Hudson Taylor to go and tell them. Do you know there's still some people in our world that don't know about God and have never heard about God? And we need to pray. We need to pray for missionaries to go and tell those people, and then we need to be missionaries right here in our little city of Salisbury, or Faith, or wherever you live. We need to be missionaries right here. Well, I will see you all on Sunday. Bye.